Welcome.
Yeah, well,
Now we're recording, so let me get going. Good to be with us, Duke. Please feel free to interrupt me at any moment throughout the presentation and ask questions. I'll try to go quickly through these, and then we can discuss after. So,
okay,
as I was saying, we are TogetherCrew. We're a team of DAO governance veterans. I've been into DAOs for about 5 years now, before in a background in organization design, network scientists like Katerina and Tiche, both who have done PhDs in this area, approaching it from different aspects as well, understanding the relationship between organization network mapping or social network mapping and the impact that that has on an organization's performance or the ability for people to work together. Cyril, our tech lead, who comes from a medtech background, so he's been handling sensitive data and building data pipelines as well for essentially a decade, before that in Accenture. And then we have a good team as well of developers, more data scientists, designers, with whom we've been working for a while. So we already kind of went through all the troubles of coming together as a team, figuring out how to be effective, build our processes. And we've been now for a year building technology and infrastructure for this challenge of analyzing a community data to figure out how things are going. So with that, these are some of the organizations we have worked with. We have received grants from and completed grants from most of them. So Aragon, Polygon, Aave, and Metacartel gave us a first grant together as a coalition of partners that we brought to do a research project on how to understand community health from a more holistic perspective. So not only like likes or numbers of members in Discord, but actually how do you really understand what are the factors that make a community resilient and stay together. Then as well, we got grants from Near Foundation, Web3 Foundation, Cello, etc. more recently to translate this research into a dashboard and essentially provide this framework for different communities and automate a lot of this work. This has already been completed and the dashboard is live. I'll give you a quick demo in a second, and if you have a community, you can also try it out. And the proposal, the grant now for SingularityNET, the idea is to leverage all this infrastructure we have built, the team, the resources, and the collaborations with all of these ventures to bring all of this into SingularityNET and leapfrog on the RFP. So we can not only deliver on the conditions of the RFP, but we can also bring all the previous technology that we have. And that way really offers very, very significant value for money and have a production ready application that is already working, for example, with Optimism with 160,000 community members. So quite a bit of scale and stability. We already went through all that pain of figuring that out. So as I was saying, in the past year, we built this analytics platform. So it gathers data from Discord, Twitter, CSV files, very soon Discourse. This one is being worked on as well, Snapshot, and many more platforms coming soon. So the architecture is designed in a way that you can easily add new data sources that get added to a relational database. So this is a database that understands what's the relationship between the objects, between the people. So we're not simply mapping the number of messages that someone is sending, because as we can see, for example, in the Swipe platform with a lot of people just making comments, a lot of those risk being made by bots or being spam or not being particularly relevant. And if those are the metrics that you base yourself on, you're gonna essentially create an incentive for noise rather than for quality interactions. So what we found from our research and the previous research from Katerina is that a way better predictor of the role that someone is playing in a social network is interactions between people. Is when there is a two-way interaction, like I'm sending you a message, you're replying to me, then I'm giving you a like, then you send me another message, etc. This shows that there is quality communication happening in between people. And then from these interactions, we can start to map a graph of who's relating with whom and who's speaking with whom and create the shape of the social network, essentially a social network graph. With understanding the shape of the social network, then we can calculate a series of indicators that I'll show you when I do the demo. But we can understand, for example, if two people are at very opposite extremes of the social network, they probably are not going to have a lot of context of each other. They're going to know very little about what the other person is doing, and there is high risks of misalignment unless they are connected by someone in the middle that can serve as a broker. So you can start to calculate all kind of performance metrics and predict how this social network is able to align or diverge, whether it's going to have too much groupthink, whether it's going to be overwhelming or not, etc. And this is essentially what we have built with an architecture of microservices. So let me show you how this is working. This is in our website, and yeah, connect here, and you can see this is so this is RnDAO, and you can see the organization. So you have, for example, these people, this person here, who's kind of quite a bit of a connector. If they're a big blob, that means that they have a lot of interactions. Small blobs, they're not very interacting. And then those who are frequent receivers and a small blob, they're not very engaged, essentially. So these two people here, they are at high risk of disengaging, and we're at high risk of losing them. Also, we know they don't have a lot of context on the social network. And I'll go on to explain why that is important. While this is actually myself. So in this community, I'm involved almost in too many things. But you can see by my position in the social network that I have a very good overview of a lot of things that are happening, a little bit less here. So if you wanted to get kind of like a complete view of the community, you might want to include this person here, this one here, and a couple of folks here, and you will have very broad perspective about everything that's going on. Then based on that, we calculate activity metrics, when it's most active. We can see who's disengaging, for example, the members that dropped based on their role in the community, and as well health indicators. So we can see whether the community is fragmented or too enmeshed, whether it's decentralized or a little bit too centralized, etc. Now, based on all this work, is that now we're building to the next stage. So as I was saying, we're trying to leapfrog. So we want to build all of these. So we add the scalability, production ready quality, and multiple data sources on top of what is there. Thanks for the comment, the compliments on the design. I'll pass them on to the designer. I'm sure she'll be very happy to hear. Then also reduce gameability. So this is based on all the research around interactions. It's obviously a work in progress. There is always, attackers are always finding new ways to game these systems, but we have already created a system that has a lot more robustness than simply measuring interactions or activity. As well, we're not trying to make a profit out of this. The idea is to reinvest all the funds from the grant into developing the tool. Our incentive is to build the best possible open source tool so that in the future is a reference, is a standard, is the core of this community data infrastructure with more pieces built into it. And then hopefully in the future, we can charge for maintenance and API calls, etc. So it's a somewhat similar model than SingularityNET. And for now, what we're doing is we're investing all we can to build this project and make it the best possible tool out there. As well, we're here for the long run. So I was saying we've been doing it for over a year and plan to continue for longer. And we work in close collaboration with the different ecosystems, close feedback loops, developing grants, testing at every iteration, etc. Some of the core things that are super important for us is we really believe that collaborating across communities is better than doing everything alone. Now, this can come with the challenge that if you have multiple stakeholders, how can you ensure that you will pay close attention to them? And here is where the modular architecture and the open source are very, very important. So the modular architecture means that every piece of these is built as a small service with an API call that connects to the others. So this allows us to combine the components like Lego building blocks, to combine them in many different shapes and serve the requirements of different organizations. Equally, because it's open source, every organization, even if we didn't have the capacity to do it, every organization that engages with us can contract another team to build on top and build whatever features they desire. We'll try to respond, but if we didn't have the capacity, we can still service a team to customize for specific applications. So these two things combined essentially means that we can get a little bit the best of both worlds, in the sense of multiple stakeholders, multiple organizations are investing together to build this infrastructure already. We're now trying to invite SingularityNET to join us in doing that. But we can still customize, and every organization has the freedom to build whatever features or extensions they need. And if they don't agree with us, they can fork the infrastructure and go their own way. So the investment in the shared tool won't be lost. And of course, this is all done with transparency. And if anyone has a doubt, join our meetings, read our chats. We operate as a DAO. So it's all fully transparent, and we really believe in collaboration, as I was saying. So we've been doing this for a while. We learned a few things, starting with experiments by implementing SourceCred in 2020. SourceCred was an earlier reputation tool based on Google PageRank algorithm. And we have learned quite a few things about this. So I'm going to share a couple of those learnings. So the first one is that reputation is a complex topic, and everyone kind of has a different thing that they mean by reputation. So some are talking about engagement. So this is simply making posts, likes on Twitter, comment on Swai, whatever. It's essentially activity. And the more active you are, the more reputation you will have. Others refer to reputation as expertise, whether you have very specific knowledge in a domain, like you are an expert in marketing or an expert in economics or an expert in whatever topic. There is another possible understanding, which is the idea of context. It's like I have reputation in this community, or I have high context in this community because I actually know what's happening. I know the people, I know their concerns, I know the politics, or at least the opinions and how things are likely to play out, what might work and might not work for this specific organization. Others can feel about reputation that is about reliability. So are we delivering on our promises? Are we doing what we said we would do? And others see reputation as social capital. It's like, oh, this person is very reputable, means that they're kind of famous. And other people tend to trust them or attribute influence to them. So as we were researching this topic, we dig a little bit deeper into these. And this is roughly our views, is that engagement is dangerous because you're incentivizing spam. So you're incentivizing noise. It's a system that is really easy to attack. And also, high engagement doesn't mean better decisions. Like if someone is all the time posting, that doesn't mean that we're going to be a better decision maker. Yes? I see you, Newman, like, oh, you're muted.
Oh, wait, do you have slides? You're not sharing your slides. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't have slides you were going with.
Oh God, yes, I've been sharing these. That makes it super awkward.
I'm glad that you read my facial expressions. Good for me keeping the camera on. Continue on. This is really, really wonderful. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so yeah, I was saying, so engagement, we find it quite dangerous as the basis for a reputation system. And let me be clear, now we're thinking is, because reputation can mean many different things, it's important that we're clear on why reputation, or reputation what for. And here we're talking reputation for governance, most specifically for decision making. If we're talking about reputation for attributing a task, whether this person should be allowed to apply for this bounty, yes or no, the conclusions would be very different. But when we're talking about decision making, etc., this is generally the way we're seeing it. So engagement, probably not the best route to go. Expertise, the expertise are really, really important. But we know from citizen assemblies, and we work with one of the largest organizations of democracy researchers, and they organize a lot of citizen assemblies for the EU, the French government, etc. So we know from the research that expertise can also put you inside a box. So you can get a little bit narrow and not be able to essentially see the bigger picture. Expertise reduces your creativity. That's some of the challenge of expertise. So one of the best systems to still apply expertise into a topic, but not be constrained by expertise, is to include expertise in the discussion, in the deliberation, but not necessarily in the ideation or in the decision-making phases. As long as we have expert input throughout the process, it's less important to have it at the pure decision-making stage. You still need to have literacy. Like if you're voting on a proposal about code and you cannot read code, well, you're not going to be able to do it. but you don't necessarily need the highest expertise to come to a lot of these decisions. The sort of decisions that will benefit from very high expertise, they can be delegated. But when we're talking about allocating funds or these sort of scenarios, you don't necessarily need such a high level of expertise, because you shouldn't be making super granular technical decisions at this level anyway. Now, that's not to say that we don't believe in them, but is to say that it's very difficult to get right and is not the lowest hanging fruit. There is context, which actually is a fairly low hanging fruit. So it's a great place to start because we can very reliably calculate context. And this has been demonstrated scientifically already. So this was based on the network graphs, etc., that I show you. Then as well, there is reliability. So track record, which is very used already. We're using this, like in the proposals that we're putting right now, we're saying, oh, I work in this organization before and I did this in the past, etc. So already it's a little bit in the system. It is not necessary that we double down into this, because it can also be very exclusionary. Unless we have a really good way to map reliability, to map someone's track record that can include all kinds of people, what we end up doing is filtering most people out, except those who have been in our tiny little community for a very long time. And so the community can become insular, and this doesn't necessarily promote quality. So although we see a lot of potential for reliability in the medium to long term, we don't believe is the best place to start right now, where verifiable credentials and these other technologies are still so immature, and there is not that much adoption yet. And then finally, with social capital influence, there is always the risk that this leads to popularity contests. Influencers, or those with a lot of visibility, they tend to have very different perspective than, let's say, the common folk. So you can end up with a principal agent problem, or entrenched power, centralization, and a lot of these other issues. So we're actually steering away from social capital and see it as probably not the best thing to be focusing on. Just because it can so quickly get confounded and reduce meritocracy. So based on these, we're essentially proposing that we start by focusing on context. And this is what makes the most sense for reputation scores to start instead of engagement. So let's not focus on engagement. Let's instead of that focus on context. They're fairly similar. They're using the same sort of data, but algorithmically, like the data science side, we treat them fairly different. Then in the future, we'll go into more advanced R&D, into reliability and expertise, and expand upon these topics. This would be like the medium to long term, so outside the scope of the first proposal that we're making. Now, importantly, reputation is not enough. To really have an impact, we need to couple reputation with incentive alignment. Like, I can have a lot of context or be reputable, to say it colloquially, in a community. That doesn't mean I have the best interest of the community at heart. And more importantly, a community, same as an organization, it happens when there are multiple stakeholders, multiple people with different needs. And these people with different needs are coming together to satisfy those needs. Otherwise, they wouldn't really come together. They find a better way to satisfy their needs by collaborating. If they cannot get their needs satisfied, they're gonna leave or get exploited. Neither a scenario we want of. So to have good decision-making, good governance at the level of a whole community, at the level of an organization, ecosystem, we actually need all of these different parties to be represented, to have a voice and a vote. Otherwise, we'll very quickly end up with governance that is exploitative. And what happens when governance is exploitative is that you have rebellion on the other side. So you have unionization or these kind of things. We see this in corporations. Only shareholders, only investors have a voice and a vote. So the employees unionize. You end up with very adversarial situations, strikes, everyone loses, the workers are not getting paid, the shareholders are not making a return on investment, becomes a lose-lose situation. That's also why, for example, the French government is advocating, or in the US a lot, there is a lot of programs advocating for employee participation in governance boards, et cetera, et cetera. So this trend is also happening in Web 2, and a lot of the Web3 dream was, what if we can get the contributors to the platform, the users, and all of them to also be token holders? That's what a lot of protocols are doing with airdrops, is trying to create that, not necessarily the best mechanism. but we're trying to create this multi-stakeholder representation. Now, if we have these different stakeholders, we need to ensure that the incentives of the people who are making decisions align with the multiple stakeholders, not only with one stakeholder, but with multiple of them, which is a complicated problem. So how do we do it? So the idea is that it's a bit different for every stakeholder, so best to go in phases. For each stakeholder, we can understand a different metric or a different way to calculate how much they belong to that stakeholder class for any given individual. And we work with the falsifiable hypothesis. So this is not a perfect hypothesis, but roughly it works that if someone belongs to multiple stakeholder classes, they're going to benefit the most by a win-win outcome that grows the pie for everyone, as opposed to splitting the pie. So as opposed to, let's say, labor providers and capital providers fighting against each other, if we can find an outcome where they both win, the people who belong to both classes at the same time, who are both a labor provider and a capital provider, so they are, for example, a token holder and also a contributor, they're going to benefit the most. So they're incentivized to make win-win decisions. So essentially, so here is the idea, is we calculate these different areas, but we also need to go for phases, because then the system becomes complex and there is more attack surface, etc. So we need to be building it bit by bit. The lowest hanging fruit here that we see is token holding, because the data is on chain, it's relatively easy to get, is part of the RFP. So we're agreeing with the logic of the RFP here pretty much. And we're suggesting that the first phase is token holding and context. And we can also apply a quadratic weighting on the token holding, potentially, so to reduce the influence of whales, but still give value to capital, to the people who are essentially invested in the success of the protocol. In a later phase, we could, for example, map the payments over the last 3 months and have a score with a decay that accounts for suppliers. And these can be suppliers of labor or suppliers of products and services to the organization, who in a way are also depending on this ecosystem and also have an interest in this ecosystem thriving, being sustainable, being healthy, growing, etc., because they're depending on it. And then finally, as a phase 3, and the only reason we're not suggesting it now is because the marketplace is still small, so it will take more time for this to pick momentum. And marketplaces that have network effects like SingularityNET, they're not evil when they are small, but if they become huge platforms with somewhat monopolistic effects, which is just the nature of these network effects power platforms, is they can use that power to start abusing users. And we don't want that. We're talking about the beneficial singularity, so we need to put a balance there. And one way to do it is that the users of this marketplace, those who are consuming the products and services in the marketplace, they can also be represented in governance. So over time, we could then include marketplace usage as also a valuable signal to give governance voting power. But as I was saying, like, we build these bit by bit as the system becomes more mature, the organization grows, and so on. And anyway, so that's essentially the idea, is that we can collect data from all of these different platforms to get a broader view of context than we'll be able to do if we only include SWI or like only the voting tool or only a CSV. Instead of that, we're being able to already use all this infrastructure, Discord, etc. Hopefully that also allows us to detect scammers, because they will likely only be present in the platforms where they're where they're incentivized, and they will not be incentivized in the rest of the community. So we can detect anomalies in the data and do this sort of interesting analysis as well. And then thanks to all of this infrastructure, we can build the RFP fairly quickly and then integrate it with the rest of SingularityNet.
Yay!
Thank you. So anyway, that's the idea. If you want, we can do one or two things, and let me know what you guys like. So not knowing the numbers, I had prepared a small board where we could do a quick brainstorm around fears, risks, concerns, etc. Or otherwise, since we're a small group, we can simply have a chat and discuss between us. Or if you want to go to another room, I can also free you up, you know.
I'm up for a chat, but I'm also really curious to do a group brainstorm, even if it's just the five of us here. That could be cool.
Great. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm gonna share the link. Is everyone familiar with Miro?
Yeah. Here we go. 2 truths and a lie. Perfect.
Exactly. So the idea here is to give one fear, one hope, and one lie. So it can be, the lie can be a real or a fake fear or a fake hope related to how these systems can evolve. And then we're going to try to guess which one is which. So you can double click in one of the names and you can add it. If you need help using the platform, let me know.
A fear, a hope, and a lie. Okay.
And I'm gonna give us 2 minutes to do that.
Oh. I got put in a penalty box for 21 seconds. Keep going, though. Keep going. Ooh, I'm coming up with great fears right now, so I'm going to keep going on my fears.
For me, fear is definitely that the system can inspire dictators and heavy authorities to even increase their control over people and citizens. And then we say, it's open source, everybody can take it. And then authorities say, cool, awesome, thanks a lot for this. And people in 10 years will look back on sessions like this and say, these fuckers have been responsible for so much shit. We are here, hey, we have a good intent, real.
Yeah, that and I think that there's a part of the coin is as like, like group think and conflict avoidance. Was it you, Felix, that was like, there was like, hey, look, we can be in conflict, but in a constructive way. That there was, somebody brought this up about like, maybe it was last night in the Pacific Town Hall, but that's a fear of mine, is that we don't, because of our social graph and the way that we're connected, that we can't sort of bring alternative view, and that brings in dictators, because then it's just whoever says the most ridiculous thing, and that no one will, you know what I mean? There's a mechanism involved there. I think they go together.
Like this emerging uniformity, right? That you have these emerging standards, and the people which are just the most popular in the space then, and the most outspoken, most socialized, by default become the most powerful people, without forcefully having any knowledge and deep experience in any specific topic. They are not experts in anything, though having the most power concentrated in themselves, right?
And I mean, and Daniel, thanks for letting us ping pong back here. And that to me goes with this idea of expertise and where expertise shows up, because one of the pitfalls mentioned in we're still being recorded. Yo, what's up? One of the pitfalls of expertise is this lack of imagination or creativity. Short story here. I had an uncle that was a heating and air conditioning expert. He did heating and air conditioning, big projects. And I was like, why are we painting the roofs like black tar? It doesn't seem like that would make it like really hot. And he's like, oh no, it doesn't make a difference. And I was like, really? Boy, that seems weird. But you know what I mean? Like there's a domain knowledge that somehow like calcifies. But we pair that up with literacy. So we need literacy, we need literate folk, but not necessarily creating expertise. Daniel said, like, you don't have to be a super coder, but you do need to have to read code and understand some of, the things. So literacy versus expertise. Yeah.
You're muted, Daniel.
That explains a lot. One thing that we're super interested in is citizen assemblies that are based on sortition. So I don't know if Newman or Felix, I see you assenting. I guess you kind of know the pattern, Newman. I don't know if you're familiar. If not, I can give you a quick TLDR.
Sure.
So it's like, if you've seen American movies of a jury, you have the citizens who are the ones who make the decision. They're citizens. They're elected at random. They're there for a period of time. They're usually paid, not necessarily a lot, but they're paid a little bit. And then you have experts, the different lawyers who are pitching different points of view and the lawyers are experts, the citizens are not experts. And then you also have a judge who's a facilitator, who's just making sure that the process is done in a proper way. But the judge is not making decisions. The experts are not making decisions. It's the citizens elected at random. So it's kind of like the same pattern that is being used for a bunch of different applications already with the European Union and the French government, etc., for complex policy topics. So one of the things that we're envisioning with these systems is that maybe reputation directly is not ideal for the decision making, but reputation can be very good to know who has a good context in a specific community or sub-community, like at least in a pocket of the community, or at least a good overview, and they can go and pitch their ideas or give context to the citizens who are elected at random to make decisions. To make sure that the citizens have all of this information, you can essentially pick these sort of representatives of the different point of view. And so the reputation system, whether we end up using it directly for decision making or simply as a step to inform the information that goes into the mix for the decision making can still play a role. And it's roughly still the same system, but it could take two very different iterations. That would be like a bigger thing that we could explore in the future, but hopefully that can bypass also a good part of the games around it, because the value of trying to game the system is not as big. So you can then focus a little bit more in participating in the system rather than running in the hamster wheel of numbers of the incentives that are created.
That's what I wrote down as one of my statements, being caught in a weird incentive loop. That I can, and this is a universal thing that I've dealt with. You can play the game, or I don't know. It's sort of like where you draw the game. For instance, right now we have downvoting in Project Catalyst. Yeah. And if you're rationally playing the game, then you would downvote there's an incentive to downvote, but it's sort of, it goes against some things that I just don't agree with. Actually, Felix mentioned it earlier about like, this isn't necessarily my competition. And then it's like, what game is everyone playing? Like, are you following these rules? Are you following those rules? And that can be a real organizational, tension point. Like, what game is everyone playing? And then it gets right into governance, because it's just like, I don't know what the game that these big companies that I deal with, I don't know their game. They can say that this is what they want, or these are their values or their code of conduct, but especially when things don't match up, and so that this takes us into really beautiful areas.
It's we have another proposal that was presenting, or maybe still is, related to the code of conflict or conflict resolution.
Okay.
And that one is a bit of a weird one. It's actually, that's a project that Optimism approved for us. They had an RFP for credibly neutral enforcement of code of conduct, because they got into a big argument. Like, the foundation was trying to, essentially there was an influential community member who got into conflict with others, and there was a whole debate around it, and the foundation had to play arbiter, and they didn't know how to do it. And there was some doxing involved, and aggressive language, etc. So they end up creating this code of conduct, but then they were like, okay, how do we enforce it without us having a backlash and being turned into the bad guys or playing favorites? And one of the ideas that we had is we can use an AI that is analyzing the interactions between people for matching with this code of conduct, which is another tool that in the right hands can be beautiful, in the wrong hands could be quite dystopian. So super important that the code of conduct itself is community governed and not imposed top down, because that would lead to terrible situations. But one of the ideas, and I would love to hear as well your thoughts, was, well, what if we can identify sexist language, harassment, aggressive language, and then use these bots to reword those sentences using nonviolent communication framework, and send the reworded sentences as a private message suggestion to the person doing it? Because if you kind of like understand that at the end everyone is trying to satisfy their needs, like everyone is just trying, at the end they're a human trying to get something, they end up with this tragic strategy that is conflict, that is very ineffective, but it's probably because they are out of their means. They don't know how else to get it done. So if we can give them the means for nonviolent communication, maybe that can help.
The nonviolent, the NVC nonviolent communication rephrase bot is hilarious, and it should be built. It should be built, even if it's just as like what, and because it's just like I want to be in that world, like, because it's just, because you're right, it's you phrased it really well. It's just sort of a malformed process for getting your needs met. I love Rosenthal. Who did the nonviolent communication. Was actually one of my very first sort of things that I got involved with, this kind of different organizational structure, and it because you can kind of see that, you know, you get into a habit or a pattern of doing it this way, and you can tell people are out of their, you know, their heads are flipped and they're not sort of thinking correctly. So wouldn't it be great if they were like, oh yeah, you've got an AI break or a little diverge mechanism. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Also, then it's I mean, it's only scratching the surface of the direction you were going at before.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that all of this sort of fits together, doesn't it? This sort of organizational and management. First thing being aware, like looking at those knowledge graphs. Like when I was a kid, I thought that. Well, I used to think that the Bermuda Triangle, you wouldn't get this. You have to be a kid from the US in the 80s. They used to scare us quite a bit about the Bermuda Triangle. Like we all were like, the Bermuda Triangle is like the worst thing that could happen. It was like every like TV, it was on TV a lot. And we were like, you know, oh, we thought the Bermuda Triangle would be a real big important thing. I thought when I learned about the networking and the internet, because we saw that, you know, that graph, we're like, that's going to be the map of all of our stuff. And it seems like it, you know, the future's here. It's just not widely distributed yet. I feel like that is the framework. Those dashboards are being used. They're just not being used by us, the users. Bringing those, empowering people with this tool set, which I feel like this is what your work together is about. So that our TogetherCrew. I think that's I'm really stoked to find out about this. This is really, really cool.
No, thank you, and you know, most appreciated. But yeah, that is what we're realizing, is that a lot of these applications have a somewhat common infrastructure that starts with the data pipelines that can connect to the multiple places where a community is operating. And then on top, once you have that infrastructure, there is many different things you can build on top, like the nonviolent communication bot, or the reputation scores, or another application that we're thinking about is skill matching. So you can know a lot of, not only like, is this person a designer, but actually, are they a designer who knows what is the way that this specific project talks about design, or something like that. And then contextually, if someone is in the middle of the social tissue of a community of designers, they probably know quite a bit about design. So you can use those as well as kind of like skill markers, but based on the content and the shape of the social network. So like, we kind of have this idea, and then we wanted to create an AI that can search that, essentially that knowledge graph, to be like, find me someone who really believes in, I don't know, open source software, or who really believes in Singularity and also has data science skills, and also, I don't know, something very contextual that you would normally not ask in a job application, but is important.
Yeah.
One dangerous thing at general reputation, contribution systems, whatnot, what I see is it's mostly related on the past, never to the future. You need data which is generated in the past, and we need to keep into account. If I were to speak to a Daniel or a Newman 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you've been fundamentally different people. And once we start to capture too much of the past, I think we block the future in some sorts. And by building too much past-oriented data sets, you by default create a setup where individuals will not forcefully feel empowered and engaged to actually develop themselves into something totally new, but it's maybe far beyond their own imagination. Because you have an active system and the people know that there is an active system, they will coordinate, they will adapt their behavior to the system which they know about. The best reputation system would be one nobody knows about. And the only system nobody knows about is an individual system. Reputation and contribution is a very subjective manner as well. How I define reputation to some individuals may strongly disalign to what we hard code sometimes. And on a more philosophic perspective, I think a lot about how to project reputation into the future without validating too much current or previous data sets. Because this only take the past as an indicator to somehow forecast and estimate which potential in the future, like in chess. You have to think about the future past, not in the next past, in order to fully develop your game and the potential of your pieces, right? If you keep the pieces based on the past, a chess game starts where your pieces are maximum limit. They have all the potential, though the value can't play out. The game of the chess game is to open up, to come away from this and to ignore the past in order to develop potential future. And this is the strength. As more you develop complexity in the future, where you see, now all my set of pieces have billions of options what they can do. And in the first move, you simply have 24 options what you can do, not that much. 10 rounds later, millions already.
So I'm thinking about two things, and I would really love to know your thoughts on these. One is the idea that the reputation score fades over time. So you're only getting, let's say, recent past. I guess that's a mitigation strategy, but not enough to address what you're saying. But I would be curious to hear your thoughts on it.
What does a coach, a psychologue, whatnot, how are they acting usually? Like before I joined blockchain, I was in psychology and pedagogy, right? What are you doing? You try to understand the past, but the past is not that important for you. You have to understand the past in order to be able to forecast a little bit, okay, what is the potential? What could be your future? And how can we get there? So the information from the past is nothing else than an indicator to define future and to help the individual to move to this future and leave the past behind. When you map a person too much to his past, you destroy his future.
Absolutely. How to build, like, I guess, a restorative justice equivalent, but it doesn't need to be about restoring injustice. It needs to be about simply potential and human flourishing. Like, how do you embed seeing the potential? That's a powerful perspective. Thanks for sharing.
Wow. Yeah, and we're building the systems now, you know, that, yeah. And it can, you know, like, and just having the insight, and then like how to, the way I'm thinking, maybe in a sort of a practical way, is, and I'm about to go to this future, they call it design fiction, where you kind of daydream 10 years ahead into the future and write a narrative based on this future that you want, you know. So instead of designing this big system, you sort of create a story where people live in the place where this has come to pass, come to fruition. I'm curious if, like, you know, we have where we try to get our aspirations into the data set, you know, like with this matching, like, I don't, like, if there was an AI and I knew the data stream, I'm really working on this now. Like, I want people to know what my skills are and what I can do, but then also aspirationally what my intention and what I want to do. We did this a little bit with the Ikigai framework last year, with Little Fish and a couple of the other groups, Gimbal Labs and C4C, and it is about like, you know, being, you know, kind of really researching yourself internally and figuring out like what it is that you want to put out into the world, like what you want to express. And organizations that help me as an individual, as a user, to do that is really valuable, I think. And it's a great group process, you know. And I think it has a lot to do, in our mind, it was a lot to do with skill matching. And I love the idea of a complexity aware, you know, not just, I wrote down designer and then somebody who said I need a designer and they show up, but you know what I mean? Like a real, you know, that is network graph aware skill matching. It definitely seems like that's part of a future sort of, you know, way to collaborate.
Yeah.
But so I think that this I'm really curious to see where this goes. I definitely feel like I can support the proposal on this funding round. I don't know how much voting power I have, but I'm stoked. I'm stoked.
No, thank you very much. And I guess we're a small room, but if you can share that your experience here was super interesting and encourage others to check it out, that's most.
Definitely the same here. You have my full support. I'm usually very critical on everything I do and any space I'm engaged in, because I know I'm a human, I'm biased, and I will think in 5 or 10 years from now very different about some aspects. We are usually, by default, we have to be enthusiastic and passionate about what we do, especially people like us. That's very often a danger as well. Another really dangerous point of reputation is you will burn the best of your people. Reputation, yes, reputation, yeah. It's just a matter of time until reputation gets translated into power. And one thing we can be sure over analyzing human history over thousands of years, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolute. And our brightest minds, we have to protect them from power. We have to protect them from reputation. I saw even in our spaces, I saw amazing people becoming the very thing they fighted against without even recognizing it, because they built too much social power, too much reputation, translated it for themselves into power. And reputation has a massive danger on destroying people. Like, by default, this is how human psychic is simply built up. There's a really interesting book around this, Ecce Homo, Become Who You Are or What You Are by Friedrich Nietzsche. It goes really interestingly on the site as well. Definitely recommend you to have a read on this.
Thank you.
Like Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, you know,
yes.
19th century guy. Okay, huh?
Hey, Gavriel, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Daniel.
Hey,
I was just in the main room with those guys, Raphael and a few others, Judith and a few others were in there. Just clarifying the if we're doing a 100K project, then like 35K is API calls and onboarding services, and so we've got to go back and rethink some of the budget. It's quite substantial there.
Only for the proposals in new projects, because this has this very special requirement. In any other pool, doesn't apply forcefully to this. But that's actually how SingularityNET is building up their business model right now. To say successful services and products would be hosted on the SingularityNET marketplace and using ideally AJAX token in order that the client or customer would use the services, or through API calls or etc.
Yeah, there's different, this is cross-platform reputation. I don't want to interrupt if you guys are on the subject, on point there. But obviously there's different ways to manage those transaction fees with the AGIX. Maybe we as a service provider, my big thing is that I think Web3 needs to be able to, I think things are going to accelerate with AI, because AI might have reason for micropayments and smart contract interactions, and that's pretty exciting. But just my big thing right now is Web 2 is just bringing on normal customers from the real world into our environment of Web 3. And I think maybe I would charge the customer fiat currency, and then I, as the service provider, would turn that into AGIX to use in smart contract functionality as kind of a middleman, instead of requiring my customers to have to buy AGIX, and they might not be Web3 savvy yet, right? So I'm trying to play with those kind of models, if that makes any sense at this point.
You can go with custodial wallets on the beginning and provide the inbuilt option that first the custodial wallet, so you don't force the people directly to, here you have your seed phrases and most of you will most likely lose them. You go with custodial wallets with the option to move the funds into on-chain wallets once the people feel comfortable to do so.
Excellent. Good idea.
Yeah. The other thing that or at least I was very hopeful for, but with the regulatory environment is being very tricky, is the use of augmented bonding curves. Because one of the issues with these micropayments and multiple applications interacting with tokens is the price fluctuation of tokens. There is too many people trying to game the system. And so for the average user can become hugely expensive. A service where the price is going up and down is very hard to manage. But there is this tokenomics mechanism called augmented bonding curves that essentially is like a vending machine for tokens, but two-directional. You can put in money and it mint new tokens, or you can burn tokens in the machine, like you deposit the tokens in the machine, it burns them, and it gives you back your money. But the price, like the amount of money you get back or the amount of money you have to put in, depends on the supply of tokens in existence. So the first token is kind of cheap, and the more and more tokens that are minted, they get more expensive. So essentially, this smooths out the fluctuation of price thanks to arbitrage. So it's not working against the traders, it's actually working with the traders, because if the price in the exchange is going too high or too low, then you can make money by buying tokens against the curve and selling them. So at the end, what ends up happening is that the average price ends up being roughly the same price than in the curve. And so as the curve, you can determine mathematically what speed of fluctuation do you allow, and you can smooth out these fluctuations. So instead of wild swings up and down, it becomes more like soft waves.
Got you.
And then the curve itself can have a fee, so the project itself can make money out of the trading activity. So it becomes a revenue source.
For the end user, you're allowing a real-time, it's like a real-time convertibility depending on what currency they want to hold, right? If they want the stability of a stable coin or a US dollar, then that's what they have, but then they got a real-time opportunity to smoothly transition into paying for smart services. That's what I'm interpreting.
Exactly. And then you can have, again, like I guess a bit like Felix was saying, if you have a custodial wallet or something like that, there could be an AI that is doing the conversions for you. So at the interface, you only see a currency you're familiar and comfortable with, but the augmented bonding curves can be in the back to mitigate market risks because of price fluctuation.
Or you can bundle it to NFTs as well, where you say, okay, you pay X HAX for this NFT. This NFT has a utility which gives you this amount of, let's say, for the next month, like a subscription, actually, which can be set really, really easy in this regard. And like this, you can prevent a little bit price fluctuations, and you can say, hey, you can buy this NFTs with stable coins as well. Then in this regard, for example, some sort of whatnot.
Taking notes, guys.
This is why we have those calls, right?
Get some notes in.
We are massive collective intelligence, and others always know so cool stuff, and just asking questions, listening, and like, I learned shitload of stuff over the last years only by.
Well, let me like literally the idea that I put in the ideas pool is, and I started having this idea in 2018, and it wasn't necessarily blockchain related, but it's components libraries. Because components libraries, developers add to components libraries, and then it's useful for everyone, like open components libraries. I just got to the point of thinking, how about if we had a platform, not just a library that we're taking stuff to put it into our own apps, but if we're co-collaborating on actually building a shared platform environment that users are coming to, and so developers are adding experiences into a platform directly, and the users are coming to that same platform to get whatever experience they want, then that was the beginning of this idea of a decentralized autonomous marketplace. Because if Felix added the NFT feature and Daniel added the curve bonding feature into the platform, so it's readily accessible for users and apps and other developers to use, this is generally the idea of what I've pitched as my idea that I want to actually explore and develop the backlog of how it might work from an infrastructure perspective. So that's literally the idea that I've proposed in the ideas pool.
On this, what I would definitely recommend you highlight this as an additional feature of use cases for the SingularityNET marketplace. Right now, the main model is really strictly bound to service products API calls in this regard. And there are not that much creative, innovative ideas yet on how to build more utility around the SingularityNET marketplace. And from my perspective, community really needs to jump in. Because after all, SingularityNET Foundation is an entity, and entities usually struggle to innovate quickly and effectively. And this is where community power hits in. Community is able to innovate on a very rapid and massive iteration and pathway.
100%. Yeah, so like for me, if users of a platform could go to, like, think of it like an Apple app library, app store. They say, yes, I want the app, and that app gets added into their user environment on the platform. So it's easy for developers to be able to find users, because the developer's app is going to be in a popular app store, and users just plug it in. They just click, yes, add this app to my UI and let me start using it. Because I recognize, like, I come from that environment, 15 years of supporting startups, and startups always starting from scratch. They've got to develop their commercial strategy and the go-to market and understand the customer and where are we going to market and how do we get our customer validation and deep prototyping. Like, I just thought, level the playing field, give developers a marketplace. You can add your app, and we've already got users, so you don't need to do marketing because the users are there on the platform. So this synergistic effect, that's, again, it's kind of like the idea I'm toying with, and that's what I want to research.
Very cool.
Excellent. I've pulled it up. I'm going to take a look. But the time flies. The clock on the wall is always holding us down. I've got another thing going, but super awesome to hang out today. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, thank you guys. I've taken some ideas. NFT augmented bonding curves, I'm gonna think.
Yeah, no, likewise. Thanks a lot for joining the group. Very much appreciate your participation, and good to meet you, Gavriel, as well. Thanks for sharing the idea. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and see you soon.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
all.
And
Thanks,
thanks a
Neely.
lot for being here and being future builder of decentralized AI and the ecosystem. You are amazing. And we can be so lucky having you, every one of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye, guys.